Other people have criticised happiness scores, and two particular streams of work, which have got quite a different take on things, both have criticised them. One is from the work of a particular scientist called Mathieu Ricard, who gave up science, became a Buddhist monk, and wrote a very good book, Happiness, A Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skill. And he tried to really get the essence of what these meditation techniques were, written for the scientist, the Western scientist, who can be quite suspicious of all this religious mumbo-jumbo. But he made some very nice statements, one of which is that true happiness, someone who enjoys inner peace, true happiness, is no more broken by failure than he is inflated by success. He understands that experiences are ephemeral and it's useless to cling to them. Now, his work really is consistent with each of us having our own internal happiness rating. We have a default setting. It can be changed, but it requires many, and we're talking hours of meditation here, to try to really immunize oneself to what life throws at you, both good and bad. And he certainly doesn't see happiness as something that we can get from a rating scale. Another criticism of this work comes from a guy called Oliver James, a psychologist who wrote a very popular book called Affluenza. It's certainly very popular in the UK. London was one of the case studies. Sydney was another one of the case studies, actually, as was New York. And he was another person who really didn't think that these happiness scores are worth the paper they're written on. In fact, he's very dismissive of these think positive techniques that are increasingly advocated, that they don't actually equip people to deal with what life throws at them. And indeed, he argues that happiness is actually just something akin to pleasure. It's something that you'll get every now and then. It's not something that you should be aiming to change by public policy. The things that give lasting long-term benefit to people largely come in four areas. He talks about these in terms of, one is connectedness. It's about relationships, feeling part of a community. A second one is about autonomy, being independent, master of your own life, not being buffeted by events. Experience, feeling that you can make a difference, you have this value in what you're doing. And finally, security, both in terms of materially and emotionally. And a lot of psychologists will say that those are the kind of human needs that are important, not the wants that tend to be emphasized in a lot of these think positive courses, because these are concentrating on materialism and things that really just do not give long-term benefit. So the question arises, well, how did we get to here with all this stuff about happiness, and did we take a wrong turn somewhere in trying to elicit well-being? And perhaps it's useful to go back to one of the great names of the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham, whose work was very influential in the development of economics. He says, "Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It's for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. On the one hand, the standard of right and wrong, on the other, the chain of causes and effects are fastened to their throne. They govern us in all we do, in all we say, in all we think." Now, there is this idea of a spectrum, pain at one end and pleasure at the other, but he is saying that there are other things that people may be interested in, that they can be valued somehow on this spectrum. And indeed, other great writers of the time were acknowledging too that it wasn't just about some very simple measure of happiness. Indeed, a quote from the second section of the US Declaration of Independence is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. Men are all created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So the issue of liberty here and other things in addition to happiness was coming out. Indeed, it's interesting, some of the debates that went on at the time, Ben Franklin and others scrubbed out the original wording of giving people the rights to acquire property, and that's what government should be about, and substituted happiness in its place. And this has led to a lot of controversy in economics about the role of land, but that's another issue in itself. But these issues were very instrumental in the development of economics, and the idea that there is this latent scale, this unobserved scale that we can actually place things on, and according to how much pleasure or pain they give the individual. And this is largely, it was developed in the 19th century and is triumphed in when it comes to a lot of evaluation of public policy. And that essentially what we do and how we value things is we can't know exactly where things are on this latent scale. It's inside the person's head. But we can make inferences about that and the positions of things on that by the choices people make. And in particular, in private markets, the amounts that people are willing to pay gives an indication of the value that they place from the good or service they're buying. Now, welfare economics, in which developed all this, has been very influential in public policy. It's generally the framework used to value goods in transport and environmental economics. Indeed, we quoted willingness to pay figures for the Sydney Transport Inquiry in terms of how much people are willing to pay in additional taxes, fares, etc., for a given improvement. But health economists have been very uneasy with this. Health economists in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, most of Western Europe rejected the idea of willingness to pay, the idea that we value something in monetary terms, because there is a very strong feeling that willingness to pay may be influenced by ability to pay, and healthcare should not be made available on the basis of wealth. But whilst health economists did abandon money as a metric, they did recognize that in the real world, we have to make decisions. We have limited resources, and there are competing claims on our time and resources. So we should be asking people to make choices, and we should observe the choices they make and infer from those what people value. And that brings in the whole field of choice modeling and stated preferences. To make this a little bit more concrete for you, I'm going to talk through the development of the first of the quality of life instruments that the team I've worked in have developed. I was working in the ICEPOP team between 2001 and 2009. Acronyms, of course, abound these days. The original remit was investigating choice experiments for the preferences of older people. And we were interested in several strands of work, but the main one was to develop a quality of life instrument for older people. Now, although we were funded by the UK Medical Research Council, the remit was not to develop yet another health-related quality of life instrument. General quality of life is of interest because older people tend to require a mix of health and social care intervention.